Do you know what time it is? It's supernatural story time. And if you're easily scared, and even if you're not, there's only one thing left to do. Just turn off the lights, because these are stories that you listen to only in the dark. Eldritch Stories, Volume 1, Story Number 1. His Tinder profile said he was 45, but he looked to be in his early 30s at most. Looking for a sugar daddy. $700 weekly, no sex. It sounded too good to be true, but as a broke university student, I was willing to take my chances. I swiped right, and Tinder let me know it was a match. His message came seconds later. Hey there, sweetheart. I cringed at that word. I hated it. But $700 was $700, so I sucked it up and replied, Hey. His name was Jack, and he told me he owned his own business, although he never specified what kind of business it was. We talked for a while before he asked me for my Venmo to send me the first payment. After a few minutes, I got the notification. I stared at the $700 for at least 20 minutes, expecting to wake up from a dream at any second, but it wasn't a dream. You still there? I clicked on the message. Yeah. Sorry, if you don't mind me asking, what are you looking for in return? I stared at the chat until he replied, I'm just looking for you to do a few favors for me. That sounded like it was going to be sexual to me. Like what? For example, the first thing I need you to do is pick up a delivery for me. That sounded innocent enough, but I was still expecting there'd be some kind of twist. $700 to pick up a package? Come on, even I wasn't that naive. From the post office or something? No. I'll send you the address. But I'd rather not do this through Tinder. You got Kick? Or you can give me your number. Kick? What was that? 2011? I decided to give him my number instead, and he texted me the address immediately, followed by the address to his house, where I would have to drop off the package. I'm not home right now, but there's a key on the bottom of the blue flower pot near the door. Go inside and put the package on the coffee table in the living room. Make sure that you lock the door when you go inside the house, and then lock it again when you leave. I grabbed my car keys and wallet and got into my car, putting the address into Google Maps. Got it. On my way. My phone buzzed as I backed out of my driveway. I'm serious. Lock the door both times, please. I thought that was a little excessive, but I promised him that I would. The house looked abandoned, had a broken chain link fence around it, with a small door that was hanging onto dear life. It stuck out like a sore thumb, surrounded by houses that were a lot nicer than this one in comparison. You here for Jack's shit? I looked up to see a man standing in the open doorway of the house. He took up almost the entire space, his head skimming the top of the doorframe. He was huge, in height and muscles, and his entire torso was covered in tattoos. Yeah, I guess, I replied, not moving from my spot on the sidewalk. Stay right there, he said. I did. I actually don't think I would have moved if he had asked me to. I looked around and realized that there was no one else on this street. I was a 21-year-old woman alone in the street. I gripped my car keys. A few minutes later, the man came back out carrying a cardboard box. It was about the size of a shoebox, but it stained and damp on the corners. Can you open your car? He asked. I opened the trunk, not wanting that inside my car seat, and he set it in. All right, there you go, he said. Thanks, I replied. I walked around to the driver's side of the car and opened the door. Oh, and one more thing, he said. I looked at him. Watch out, he said. I didn't reply. I blasted my music as I drove to Jack's house, hoping it would drown out my anxiety. It didn't. I parked my car in the stone driveway and stayed inside the car, admiring the house. It was a huge house with stone pillars on the front porch and the greenest grass I had ever seen in my life. I turned the car off and got out. I grabbed the package and walked to the front door, getting the key from where he said it would be. I opened the door and stepped in, closing it behind me. I thought about what he had said about locking the door when I got inside. I thought that was a little overboard, but as I stared at the closed door, something made me reach out and lock it. I walked inside, my feet cushioned by the thick maroon carpet, and admired the inside of the house. All the furniture was wooden and looked incredibly expensive. I would probably finish school a dozen times with the money that it took to furnish this place. I set the package down on the coffee table, and as I walked back to the door, I heard a phone ringing from somewhere inside the house. I froze. In my pocket, my phone buzzed. I took it out to look. Don't answer any calls that aren't from Marvin. I put my phone back and followed the sound of the phone, poking my head into a few different rooms before I found it in an office. I walked over to the desk and looked at the caller ID. Incoming call from Jack. That was odd. I grabbed my phone to look at the message again. I was starting to get a little bit creeped out and decided I wouldn't answer, just to be safe, and left the house remembering to lock the door as I left. I've done a few more favors for Jack since then. I drove a BMW to a random park in another city, only to get out and drive a different car back to Jack's house. He had me meet one of his employees at lunch, who then gave me a briefcase to deliver to the first house I had gone to and told me he would know if I looked inside. On several occasions, he asked me to drive down to that same house and stay with a guy whose name was Julio for a certain amount of time. In total, I've made around $3,500. Most recently, Jack asked me to stay in his house overnight. I woke up to a text message from him. I need you to spend the night at my house. I hadn't ever seen him in person, but I had talked to him on the phone a few times. He proceeded to tell me he would pay me $1,000 to spend the night at his house, provided that I follow a few rules. I drove to his house that evening. The driveway was empty, and it normally was, but the porch light was on. I walked up, unlocked the door, went inside, and then locked it again. Everything in the house looked the same. Jack had told me over the phone that he would leave the list of the rules on the dining room table. I set all my stuff down in the living room. My bags looked like garbage compared to the fancy furniture in there. I wandered into the kitchen and then to the dining room. Sure enough, there was a piece of paper on the wooden table, held down by an empty glass. Lock the door when you come in. Only answer calls from Marvin. Don't turn on any faucets between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m. Don't open the door for anyone, no matter who they say they are, after 10 p.m. If the door to the closet at the end of the hall is open, sleep in the library. If closed, sleep in any of the bedrooms. The gardener comes at midnight. If he starts knocking on the windows, hide. Turn the TV on and let it play on static through the night. Do not forget to do this. Help yourself to anything in the fridge. I'll pay you in the morning. Good night. I made sure to follow all the rules. To be honest, I was regretting my decision, but seeing as I was already here and I was getting paid, I decided to stay anyway. I figured as long as I followed all the rules, I'd be perfectly fine. Still, it felt a little odd. What was this, a haunted house? Nevertheless, I lounged around the house for a few hours, as I was planning on going to sleep around 9, since that's the time that all the weird shit would begin to happen. At 8:50, I brushed my teeth, using the faucet for the last time before 9. I checked the closet in the hallway, and upon seeing that it was open, I moved my stuff to the library and got ready to sleep on the couch. I locked the doors just in case and laid on the couch, scrolling through my phone. I hadn't gotten any more messages from Jack, and I started to think up scenarios and reasons as to why he had such strict, peculiar sets of rules in his house. I dozed off at some point because at exactly 10:16 p.m., I was woken up by the doorbell ringing. I was about to get up to check, but then I remembered the rule. Don't open the door for anyone, no matter who they say they are, after 10 p.m. I stayed on the couch, trying not to move, paranoid that they would hear even the slightest sound. "It's the police. Open up." I didn't move. "Hello? It's the police. Open up or we're coming in. I still didn't move, but I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. There was silence for a while after that. Then the doorbell rang again. Hey, it's Jack, let me in. It sounded like Jack, but still, I didn't get up. He would have a key, wouldn't he? Why would he need me to let him in? This continued for almost a full hour. Different people would ring the doorbell, announce themselves, and then disappear when I didn't respond. I was finally able to fall asleep, and the gardener never came. When I woke up the next morning, I heard someone in the kitchen. I got up slowly and unlocked the door as quietly as possible, taking my phone with me and walking across the living room and into the kitchen. I stopped at the entrance and peered in. It was Jack. He was standing in front of the stove, stirring something as the coffee machine brewed coffee on the counter behind him. Hey, good morning, he said when he saw me. Hi, I replied, nervous. I hadn't seen him in person before, but he looked exactly like his pictures online. Scrambled eggs? He asked, motioning to the pan with a wooden spoon. Yeah, thanks, I replied, walking over to take the plate from him. I ate my breakfast and drank some coffee in silence. So, how was it? He asked. It was okay. Nothing super freaky happened, I replied. Cool, he replied. There was an awkwardness in the room. I think I'm going to go now. I have class, I trailed off. I didn't, but I really wanted to get out of there. Oh no, yeah, sure. I'll talk to you some other time, he replied. I grabbed my stuff and he walked me to my car. I could see him standing in the driveway staring at me as I left. When I got home, I unpacked all my stuff and noticed that I still had the list with me. I sat on my bed and read it again. I felt my body tense up as I realized that I had forgotten something. Turn the TV on and let it play on static through the night. Do not forget to do this. Turn the TV on and let it play on static through the night. Do not forget to do this. Do not forget to do this. I stared at the words on the page until they lost meaning. Beside, my phone buzzed, snapping me back to reality. It was the $1,000 payment. I looked at my phone and then back at the list. Maybe it wasn't an important step. As I was thinking this over, a text from Jack came in. I'm not in town right now. I should be back next week. So you're free from running any more errands for me until then. Just send the payment. Go do something fun. I stared at the message and read again and again. And once more for good measure. I'm not in town right now. I thought back to this morning and how Jack was in his house, how he gave me breakfast. I'm not in town right now? Within minutes, a new text came in, this time from a number I didn't recognize. Did you forget to do something? The text was followed by a picture of Jack, or whoever this version of Jack was, standing in front of the TV. I didn't respond. Next came another picture. This one was the outside of my house. It was followed by another text. Watch out. Next story. How the hell do you suppose this happened? The sheriff asked as he wiped the sweat from his brow. No clue, replied the crime scene technician. She snapped pictures. It seems pretty clear. He hung himself, but I really don't know how long it takes a corpse to mummify. I watched the man and the woman examine the dangling corpse, as though I wasn't even in the room. They hadn't asked me to leave, and oddly, I didn't want to. The shock of discovering the body had long since passed, and I had instead been filled with a macabre fascination. Less than 2 hours earlier, I had stopped at the first roadside motel that I had seen in hours. Traveling Route 66 had been a dream of mine for years. With the pandemic waning and my work as a copywriter not tying me down, I had taken off without much planning. Motels had been more abundant in Texas and the eastern portion of New Mexico, but the further west I drove, the less frequently I had happened upon one. Even when I did manage to find a place with vacancies, they were often dilapidated and pretty questionable. I did my best to consider it part of the adventure, but some nights I felt better than others. When I pulled up to the crumbling stucco office at the Alabaster Springs Motor Inn, it didn't fill me with an overwhelming sense of safety. The half square of motel rooms behind the office seemed a decade past good maintenance, and the lack of cars in the parking lot told me that other travelers had thought the same. Still, It was somewhere to stay for the night. Dwarvish dirt devils swirled in front of my feet as I walked toward the door to the office. Large chunks of the stucco facade sat in piles on the windowsill and peppered the foundation of the building. Electric whining filled my ears from the flashing open sign above the door. Before I entered, I could see an old man through the dirty windows. A yellowed tank top sagged on his bony frame. He absently swatted flies as he watched the rabbit-eared television in the corner. "Hello," I said to the man as I pushed open the door. My eyes drifted down to a lopsided name tag pinned to his shirt identifying him as Clarence. "Any rooms available?" The slovenly man looked at me and arched an eyebrow. "Empty parking lot should have been a clue," Clarence replied sarcastically. "Rooms 50 for the night. Don't expect much. Ain't got no help no more since Davy run off." Not knowing who Davy was or where he had run off to, I decided to continue with my business. It was late, and my eyes felt like they had lead weights adhered to them. I approached the counter, pulled my debit card from my wallet, and set it on the counter. Clarence slid back. "Card reader's busted," he said dryly. "Cash only." I curled my lip and placed the card back into my wallet. Thumbing through the bill pocket, I could see that there was only two wrinkly 20s and nothing else. I fished the bills out of my wallet and held them up for the old man to see. "I've only got 40, I replied. "I can Venmo you the rest later." "That'll be enough," he spat as he snatched the cash from my hand. "Don't know what the hell a Venmo is, but you can Venmo it somewhere else. Better afford it than nothing." Tossing a set of keys attached to a maroon diamond keychain, he pointed me to room 3 to the right of the office entrance. I asked him if it had been cleaned recently, and he muttered that Davy had cleaned it before he left 6 months earlier. No one had occupied the room since. How delightful. After pulling my car in front of the room and unloading my duffel bag, I made my way to the door of room 3. Thick dust clung lazily to the surface and covered my knuckles as I slid the key into the lock. The force required to turn the deadbolt further detailed this place's lack of care. Snapping dryly from the doorframe to the lock gave way, allowing the door to squeal on its hinges as it opened into the room. Stale, dry air hammered my face, and I could see dots of dust dancing in the beams from the low sun. Breathing was a laborious task in the stifling heat of the room. I tossed my bags onto a metal chair and turned on the window-mounted AC unit before stepping outside. A few minutes to let the struggling unit cool down. The oven of a room seemed like my only option. Momentarily, I toyed with the idea of getting into the car and driving until I found another motel, but I had no clue how far that would be. The cell signal was abysmal out here, so relying on GPS or Google didn't seem like a safe option now. I would chance it here for the evening and get on the road first thing in the morning. A night of sleep in a shady motel still seemed better than falling asleep at the wheel. Once I was fairly certain the room's temperature was survivable, I headed back inside. To my surprise, it was a great deal cooler than I anticipated it would get. After returning to the room, my assessment went from irritation to amusement. It was a relic of the 1970s. Formica laminate tables and chairs, a knob-controlled TV, and wood-grain wall panels decorated my room. The carpet was matted shag, and the yellowed ceiling was covered in popcorn-style texture. I scooped my duffel bag from the ancient chair and headed to the accordion door closet door. Odds didn't seem in favor of a nighttime burglary, but a lifetime of city dwelling had taught me to be cautious of leaving my things sitting out in the open. Maybe my mother had a little to do with it as well. When we had traveled in my childhood, I was always made to put my belongings in the closet or dresser. The plastic handle of the fold-away door felt brittle in my hands, so I cautiously slipped my fingers around the frame to give it a push. Snapping away from the wall, the door retracted, revealing a gaunt man staring back at me. I stumbled back and threw my duffel bag at the figure as I fell to the floor. As I pushed myself back across the room, the man remained in place, but began to slowly turn around. He rocked gently from side to side. When I looked down, I could see his feet were not touching the floor. My eyes drifted back up to his head, which had now turned around to stare at the wall of the closet. I could see a rope around the leathery skin of his neck vanish into the ceiling above. The body swayed and turned until it was facing me again. Empty eye sockets now seemed to peer in my direction. Thin wisp of hair and long, cracking nails jutted ghoulishly from the taut, papery skin. Thin veins of dried skin filled the creases in the flannel work shirt. The head drooped, and the open jaw rested on his chest in a silent scream. A syringe dangled haphazardly from the man's left arm. As the body began to turn again, the left foot made contact with my duffel bag, causing the body to jerk. Something fell from the body and slid down the side of my bag. The sudden motion from the dangling corpse startled me from my trance, and I bolted from the floor, and I ran out of the room toward the office to call the police. After taking the pictures of the swinging cadaver, the sheriff and crime scene technician retrieved a wallet from the hanging man's back pocket. The driver's license inside identified the man as David Weldon Shell. The old man from the office Clarence identified him by his clothing and a withered tattoo on his forearm. Davy was Clarence's son. He told the sheriff that Davy had a history of substance abuse, and he had always assumed he skipped town to escape drug debts. Men had stopped by periodically asking for his son, and when they learned he had disappeared, they inquired about his current whereabouts. Clarence always disappointed them and sent them on their way. I stared in awe the entire time. My life had been an easy one. There were no great traumas to share and no stories of tragedy. My heart swelled with sympathy for the man the newly arrived EMTs were placing in a body bag. I couldn't help but consider the difficult road he had traveled in his life, and which had led him to this. After the earthly remains of David Shell had been placed in the ambulance, the sheriff offered me a ride to the nearest town where a motel was down the road. I thanked him but told him I didn't want to leave my car behind. He nodded understandingly and jotted the directions to the new motel on a sheet of paper from his notepad. I entered the room a final time to retrieve my duffel bag. Fortunately, I hadn't taken anything else into the room, so my departure was swift. With the door pulled shut behind me, I walked to my car and tossed the bag in the back seat before heading to the office to return my key. When I entered the office, Clarence was staring intently at the TV, fly swatter in hand, just like I had found him when I arrived. He didn't seem upset in the least about the discovery of his son's mummified remains in room 3. "I'm sorry about Davy," I said to Clarence as I placed my key on the counter. "Don't spend too much time weeping over some deadweight junkie," he responded, without looking at me. "Don't weep over your $40 neither. Just 'cause you didn't stay don't mean you get a refund." His response startled me almost as much as finding the dead man in my closet. I couldn't understand how anyone could speak that way about their dead child. Feeling disgusted, I turned to walk back into the stifling night air. "Hey!" Clarence exclaimed as I was opening my car door. He now stood in the doorway of the office. "You find anything interesting in there after you saw Davy?" "What do you mean?" I asked. The old man rolled his eyes. "Just any damn interesting thing, you dimwit," he barked. I threw up my middle finger at Clarence and settled into my car. He turned to head back into the office and slammed the door. Relief filled me as I pulled into the road that would lead me back to Route 66 and hopefully a nicer motel. A few days later, I made it to Santa Monica, but the destination had lost its appeal. After the grim discovery hanging in my motel closet, I hadn't been able to enjoy anything. None of the sights had any luster. Food made me feel nauseous, and even the softest bed made me toss and turn in my sleep. So I decided to go home. The sun was setting beyond the horizon as my tires rumbled down the road. I could see the green sign with white letters showing the turn ahead that led back to Alabaster Springs. An ironwood tree stood vigil behind the sign, and its thin branches rubbed back and forth over the top of it. My headlights kicked on to respond to the low light, and the beams illuminated the skeletal fingers of the tree. It seemed to almost reach toward the road. A lump raised in my throat, and my stomach dropped as I saw something swinging from the largest branch. David Shell's hollow eyes met with mine as he swayed in the breeze. News nodded around the ironwood branch. His skeletal, thin arm pointed toward the road leading to Alabaster Springs. I slammed on the brakes, and my car slid into the shallow ditch. My heart hammered against my chest. The engine had died, and the tires left the pavement, and I tried desperately to restart it. Over my shoulder, I could hear rhythmic tapping against my window, and looked back to see Davy's boot bumping against it. In a panic, I threw my door open and ran to the other side of the road before I tumbled into the dust. As I regained my footing, I stumbled backwards and gazed at my car and the ironwood tree behind it. Davy was gone. A single low tree branch tapped against the rear window of my car. I vomited onto the pavement. It ran down my face and dripped onto my shirt. Tears welled in my eyes from the acidity in my mouth and the stench from my clothing. Wearily, I glanced at the tree again, but Davy was nowhere to be seen. I staggered back to my car and opened the back door. Rifling through my duffel bag, I pulled out a clean shirt to replace the soiled one I was wearing. After putting on the new shirt, I folded the dirty one and slid it into the outside pouch of the bag. As my hand slid into the pouch, it bumped against something rigid. I grabbed the item and pulled it out to examine it. It was a maroon diamond keychain from the motel with two bronze keys on the silver ring. Turning it over in my hand, I could see the writing. On one side it said the Alabaster Springs Motel, and on the other, if found, please return to the office. Memories of Clarence and his contempt for his son filled my mind, and I drew my arm back to throw the key into the dusty field. Take them back, whispered a voice. It sounded as though it came from the ironwood tree. I turned to look at it again, but there was no one there, just my imagination. I drew my hand back once more to throw them into the distance when something grasped my shoulder and spun me around. Take them back, screamed a voice from before. Davy stood before me, hollow eye socket staring at me. He was in the center of the road, still pointing toward Alabaster Springs. The rope still hung from his neck, and the needle dangled from his outstretched arm. Please. Without another thought, I jumped into the seat of my car and turned over the engine. I smashed the gas pedal to the floor and aimed the car on the road to Alabaster Springs. In my rearview mirror, I could see the diminishing figure of Davy standing in the road next to the ironwood tree, still pointing. After a half-hour driving, I could see the dingy road sign for the Alabaster Springs Motor Inn ahead. The parking lot sat as empty as the first time I had seen it, and the light in the office glowed in contrast to the dark of the evening. Unlike my last visit, Clarence was nowhere to be seen. I put my car in park and surveyed the motel for any sign of life. A light shone through the curtains of a room that I was able to recognize as the one I had previously rented. Room 3. The door was slightly ajar, casting a thin line of illumination onto the sidewalk outside. Cautiously, I approached the open door and pushed it open a few more inches. At first, I couldn't see anyone inside, but heard shuffling on the carpet. Edging the door open a few inches more, I leaned my head in to see Clarence on his hands and knees examining the closet door. He was cursing under his breath as his head darted from side to side. "Clarence," I said loudly. The old man bolted up and turned to look at me. His eyes squinted in an attempt to improve his failing eyesight. A sneer curled on his mouth, and I knew he recognized me. "The hell do you want?" he asked as he clambered to his feet. "Here to reminisce about the good times?" I tossed the keys to him, and to my surprise, Clarence raised his hand and caught them. The old man stared at the keys and smiled. He turned them over in his hand and began to laugh. "Looks like you did find something after all, huh?" he asked rhetorically. "Now get the hell out of here." Clarence pointed toward the door. I had expected some word of thanks from the old bastard, but he was just as endearing now as when we had first met. Without another word, I turned to leave the room. As I rounded the corner toward my car, my path was blocked by a silhouette. Davy's withered corpse shuffled in my direction on wobbly legs. As he neared me, I attempted to move out of his path, but wasn't fast enough. A slender arm bolted from his side and wrapped around my arms before shoving me out of his way and sending me sprawling into the parking lot. I sat up on the cracking pavement and could see the terror in Clarence's eyes as the corpse turned the corner into room 3. He dropped the keys and held his hands up in a surrendering gesture as his son stumbled toward him. Clarence began to back away but soon slammed into the wall of the closet. I'm sorry, boy, Clarence yelled. I needed the money, and you wouldn't help me. Davy continued lumbering forward. If you would have just given me a little cash, we'd have both been fine. Davy removed the noose from his neck and continued on. Damn it, Davy, Clarence screeched desperately. I shot you up one last time. Ain't that worth anything? Davy Shell reached his father and grabbed the cloth of his shirt in a tight fist. The old man punched at the corpse to no effect. The corpse's free hand draped the noose around the screaming man's neck and tossed the end over the support beam at the top of the closet. Slowly, Davy began to tug the slack of the rope, and Clarence lifted from the ground. I should have killed you when you was just a... Clarence said before his speech became a strangled moan. His feet thrashed, and his hands grabbed helplessly at the rope sinking into his neck. Davy turned away from his struggling father and picked the key ring up from the matted shag carpeting. He stumbled from room 3 toward this side of the office building in the center of the lot. When he reached the steel hatch leading to the crawl space beneath, he got on his knees and inserted the key. The lid squealed open and the corpse reached inside, withdrawing 2 dust-covered shoulder bags. Dragging both bags behind him, he returned to room 3 and tossed the bags below his father's feet. Crumpled wads of bills began to tumble from the unsecured packs and slide onto the floor. Clarence dangled in silence above the money he had so desperately wanted. Managing to break my trance, I darted for my car and sped out of the lot. 3 days later, I was finally back home and still reeling from the experience. I slept with the lights on for weeks and refused to open my closet. After a few weeks had passed, I worked up the nerve to look up the nearest newspaper to Alabaster Springs. There was a headline from the previous week detailing the discovery of a local motel owner who had hanged himself to death in the same room in which his son had taken his life. The article brushed casually over the bags of money. Thankfully, there was no mention of an investigation or concerns that anyone else was involved. At the bottom of the article, there was a picture of Clarence in his younger years. He still looked hateful, and the worst part of me isn't sad that he's dead. Not sure what that says about me, but I have to handle that on my own. Next to him is a picture of David. Davy. He's smiling and looks happy. It's a relief to see his eyes, rather than those hollow sockets. I hope he's at rest now.